Child sexual abuse is endemic the world over, and it's costly to individuals and to the state. And yet both the individuals and both society and the state behave in a way that allows the crime not only to continue, but we actually give it space to grow and thrive. We do this through our narratives and where we put our funds to fight it. In the UK, in 2022, 105,000 cases were reported to the police. In April 2020, the National Crime Agency said that there were thought to be around about 300,000 people at risk to children. The National Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the NSPCC, claimed that there's been an 82% climb in online grooming within the last 5 years. The Lucy Faithfull Foundation claimed 1 in 6 children will be sexually abused, and around 1/3 of these will be by under 18s. Every authority admit that this is way under the numbers that are true. I don't say this to scare you, because scaremongering is what leads us to these bad narratives. This is what gives them weight. I say this with a question: is this okay with you? If not, how do you think we should fight this? I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. I've spent a long time thinking about what justice might look like. As I moved from harmful relationship to harmful relationship, I started to think that I was the one that drew the monster out of the people. But several years after that original abuse, I reported it to the police, found out that the guy was still abusing, was teaching 13-year-olds, and knew that I had to go through the court process. Not really for me, but for the others that were still being affected by it. And I carried a lot of shame as well, because I suspected that there were others and I didn't do anything about it earlier. Over the years, I've thought lots about how we end this crime. Watching news of other children abused or killed, or raising my own children living in fear that this might happen to them. I've considered the effectiveness of jail, castration, lobotomy, death sentence to the child sex offender. I've considered being a vigilante and hunting them down myself. But as I read or weighed these options over the years, each would fail to be effective. In fact, the ethics of these things began to play a part in my thoughts. Coming into education later on, I found myself exploring the ethics of writing sexual trauma, as my memoir crossed over the lives with those whose stories interlinked with mine. I hopped from my undergrad straight into a master's in gender violence and conflict, with loads of questions still bothering me. I discovered that our narratives from crime agencies and the media distance us from the perpetrator, from the person committing child sexual abuse. I discovered Lucy Faithfull Foundation, who work with people thinking about harming children, and read books that convinced me that we need to stop talking and seeing the perpetrator as inhuman and behaving in a way that cannot be stopped. I discovered feminist movements that were looking at the violence of the state and the legal systems as they are and questioning their effectiveness. Audre Lorde argues that using the master's tools, the tools of the state rooted in patriarchy and racism, sexism and homophobia, such as the law, can only see the most narrow parameters of change. Lola Olufemi's writing of abolition feminism argues that we need radical and creative solutions that are hugely different from the patriarchal ones that are currently in play. She says that for the justice system to work, those who are guilty, the bad people, would be on the inside, and those on the outside would know safety. We'd have police that were effective in catching the bad people. They would do it with racial neutrality in every process. This system would be effective in rehabilitating those convicted and could right all of the injustice caused by suffered by the victims. Let's break this down a little bit. Those who are guilty, the bad people, would be on the inside, and on the outside, everyone else would know safety. We would have police who are effective in catching the bad guys, or bad people, and ensure racial neutrality in every process. The reality is that the majority of child sex offenders, or people with harmful sexual behaviours, are not in prison. In 2019-2020, 90% of reported child sexual abuse didn't result result in a charge. And only 3.3% of defendants were convicted, with 1 in 20 cases resulting in charge and fewer still in prosecution. Olufemi writes that sex offenders are walking among us. They're our family members, our friends. They hold government positions. They make the laws that claim to hold others to account. Child sexual abuse is one of the most emotive crimes and one that instills fear into most adults. It drives hate. The emotive quality of this crime also removes our ability to see the person behind it. The sex offender has long been portrayed as the monster of our society, the demonic creature that doesn't represent anything of humanity. Sojourn Joburg and Gentry talk about female sex offenders in big cases where they're captured in storied fantasies, seen only through gender. They're either seen as the wayward mother who misaligned her love, or they must become the monster in the mad and bad category and bring the world back into order. The monster undermines the hegemonic powers and tenets within the UK and threatens to expose child sexual abuse higher up in power. Hugo Kierkegaard argued that these people are not monsters sent from another planet, they came from our communities. And we have to find ways to work with them back in the community whilst keeping the community safe. Lucy's Faithful Foundation warned that whilst we're busy looking for monsters, we will not see the friend, the relative, or the popular celebrity who is much more likely than a stranger to actually be abusing children. We won't recognise the signs of concerning behaviour that could help us to protect a child. One of the greatest causal roles that has potential to give root to harmful sexual behaviours is trauma. We don't like to think about the abuser being a victim, but without seeing this first, we can't actually hope to end child sexual abuse. It doesn't excuse the crime, but it does give us an idea on how to end it. We need to separate out the monster from the person with harmful sexual behaviours for a number of reasons, and not least because 1/3 of child sexual offenders are under 18. Today, there can be any gender, sexuality and race, though evidence does tell us that a high percentage are male, heterosexual and white. Howard Spivak of the Centre for Disease Control states that some experiences in early childhood make it extremely predictable for involvement with violence, including child sexual abuse. Basil van der Kolk draws from research that reveals that trauma produces actual physiological changes to the brain. And Judith Herman explains that when secrecy prevails, the story of the traumatic event surfaces not as a verbal narrative, but as a symptom. There are 2 points that need to be made here. The first, not all who get abused will go on to abuse. Abuse affects everybody differently. But we do need to acknowledge that a high percentage of convicted child sex offenders have experienced childhood trauma, and one of the main areas is child sexual abuse. Secondly, the evidence that trauma leads to trauma can't be used to excuse any harmful sexual behaviour. It's important to see the causal role they play in sex offences. But as adult humans, we all have a responsibility for our behaviour. This is where abolition feminism gives us the tools to end the cycle. It recognises healthy communities as key. It encourages investment in community, in housing, healthcare, mental health care, and ensuring work for everybody. Youth groups, community events, and good signposting services for addiction are essential. These can give people reasons to want to stay on the right side of the law. In the UK, the Lucy Faithful Foundation work with people with harmful sexual behaviour, offering help long before a crime is committed. They offer a helpline and an online resource for people to work through. They work with survivors and with people thinking about harmful behaviours. But the UK is not consistent with their funding, and the investment is placed in the system that the state is desperate to protect, the carceral system. Government funding for child sexual offences allocates less than 0.3% of its funds towards first-hand preventative action and 99.76% towards post-crime. This leads us nicely on to Olufemi's statement. The system, if it's working right, would be effective in rehabilitating those convicted and could right all of the injustice suffered by the victims. There is a replicating violence in our prison systems. There are high rates of sexual and physical abuse within them, and the oppressive and exploitative nature of the system itself sees many people who go in with non-violent crimes come out and commit violent crimes. It restarts patterns of abuse back into society. From the punitive to the post-crime, the child sex offender in our system will need to be integrated back into society. It's got to happen at some point. And the way that we do this happens, can predict the rate of reoffence, and done well can minimise harm post-crime. Many claim that this criminal cannot be helped, that they're biologically flawed. This narrative enables society to agree that investment in surveillance on the child sex offender is better than rehabilitation to a lost cause. The sex offender register has been brought with problems from the beginning, and there's no empirical evidence that it's contributed anything towards child protection. It's another extension of surveillance, funded with permission, given in fear, and without this, that there would be no child safe. The sex offender treatment programs are believed to work most effectively when carried out in hospital or in community settings, but the most effective ways to reduce reoffending are in the circles of support and accountability. It's a group called Circles where volunteers offer friendship and come alongside people as they reintegrate into society. Abolition feminism argues that community is where the most effective rehabilitation comes from. However, despite the evidence within annual reviews, these services and others working well to rehabilitate are never funded properly. It's hard, I know. Why invest in the human that chooses to harm children in the worst way? Why ask you to question where the funding is going and why it's not going towards helping them? And you'll receive, if you do speak to the police, you'll receive comments such as people want justice and they want retribution. But maybe the question isn't why are we investing in them, but rather what will happen to the sex offender? Not what will happen to the sex offender, but rather what are we doing now that we understand that our system is ineffective as it is? Abolition feminism would ask us, are we getting to the roots and giving society the best chance to live well? Is our justice system working effectively enough to protect our children? Not talking about child sexual abuse peacefully doesn't hide the offender, it hides the survivor, denying their story and thus their healing. So coming back to my original question, is it okay with you? How do you believe we should fight this? With more money into the same ineffective systems, with more scaremongering to take our attention away from the person behind the crime, or by looking to organisations such as Lucy Faithfull Foundation, seeking creative and radical solutions such as abolition feminism? Because as a survivor, all I want is for this crime to stop. I want the next child protected, and I want to see an end to this cyclical crime.